Gary served the Mountain Yards as a medic, and he learned how to live.
We had a saying in Vietnam that to really live, you must almost die. To those that fight for it, life will have a meaning the protected will never know. Well, on April 1st, 1970, we were surrounded by over 10,000 of the enemy, and they started a barrage of artillery rocket fire early in the morning. Early in the morning, the only people that were up were women and children, so the only casualties that were occurring were women and children. Being the head medic, my job was to train other mountain yards to become medical aid men too. So I was looking for a lot of the mountain yards so I could hand out medical equipment because women and kids were being wounded. But my alert position was at a 4.2-inch mortar. So I was running to that position. When I saw a mountain yard that had been wounded, I stopped and I started to take care of him, and I heard a rocket coming in. I threw myself on top of him to protect him from the blast. The blast landed about 20 feet away, and I immediately felt like I got kicked by a horse. And I remember actually seeing myself flying head over heels, and I landed in that 4-deuce mortar pit amidst a bunch of sandbags. And I remember looking back, and the mountain yard that I was working on was just blown apart. It was a puzzle to me about I was on top of him, and yet I'm living, and he was just torn to pieces. But when I got hit that first time, I tried to get up, and I couldn't move. But what I felt almost immediately after I realized I couldn't move, when I felt somebody picking me up, and it was Dale, my 15-year-old bodyguard. And I said, Dale, how did you find me in the midst of this? Because there was just chaos going all over. He said, this is where I belong. We had made a pact with each other to always be there for each other, no matter what. And he said, this is where I belong. And so he picked me up because I couldn't walk, and he carried me throughout that battle.
This is a portion of the Medal of Honor citation that would be written for Gary 3 years later. Sergeant Bykirk, with complete disregard for his personal safety, moved unhesitatingly through the withering enemy fire to his fallen comrades, applied first aid to their wounds, and assisted them to the medical aid station. Sergeant Bykirk's complete devotion to the welfare of his comrades, at the risk of his life, are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit on him, his unit, and the U.S. Army.
Everything that's in my citation that it says that I did, I only did it because Dale was able to carry me. I was shot 2 more times. Dale would take me down to the medical bunker to get help. And I would say, no, I can't stay down here. We need to get back out into the battle. And Dale, because of our friendship and because he didn't want me to go out there alone, he carried me back into that battle. He got shot in the leg and couldn't carry me anymore, but he dragged me so we could continue to fight and continue to help those that were being wounded. And we heard a rocket coming in. Dale rolled me over, laid on top of me, and the rocket exploded. I said, okay, Dale, it's time we got to get going again. And Dale was killed by that rocket blast.
Gary describes Deo as a very special young man in my life who taught me a lot about living.
After the rocket attack that killed Deo, 2 other Montagnard medics carried Gary to a place where he could be medevaced. And now Gary was fighting to stay alive.
I had tubes in my arms, tubes in my neck. I was catheterized. I had tubes down my nose. I had blood flowing in from bags up above. It was just a terrible picture. Plus, my abdomen had been ripped open. I had an ileostomy. My large intestine was outside my abdomen, trying to heal. It was in pretty sad shape. But the scariest thing is that I would go unconscious. And the fear that paralyzed me is this death? Is this what it's like to die? I say that was the day that I fought death hand to hand. And it was like every time I would bring one of my weapons, my strength, my confidence, death would kind of go, is that the best you got? You're going to lose and you're dying. And I would go unconscious. One of the times that I came to, there was a chaplain that was there. And he said, I'm glad to see you're awake, son. I've been by your bed praying for quite a few days. And I said, I'm glad to be awake, sir. And he said, would you like to pray? And he handed me a cross. And I said, I don't know how to pray. I don't even know who to pray to. And he said, "That's okay, son. God knows how to listen." And I said a prayer at 23 years old, my first prayer. I said, "God, if you're real, I need you." And that prayer was made from an empty shell. I had nothing left inside. Everything that had given me life, given me success, I tried to fight death with it, and death defeated it. I had nothing left. And so I said, "God, if you're real, I need you." And something happened at that moment. I wasn't miraculously healed. There wasn't bolts of lightning that came down, but there was a peace that came over me. It was a realization that there was something greater than me outside of myself that was real. But more importantly, there was a sense of affection with that presence, that being that was there. I felt loved. I felt comfort. I felt a peace. And I say that my courage failed, but faith was born on that day that I made that prayer.
That prayer was the beginning of Gary's search to find out who God is. He was also embarking on a long physical recovery, much of which would happen in a hospital in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And while he was there, he had an unexpected visitor, his father.
As soon as I saw him, I knew who he was, even though I hadn't seen him in over 20 years. But he came to me and he put down his business card by my bedside. And he said, "Gary, I want you to know that I've never stopped loving you. And if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I'd love to have you come to Florida to visit me."
Gary would make that visit, but not yet. First, he enrolled in college, since his injuries kept him from pursuing a career in the Special Forces. He went back to the same college he had dropped out of to join the Green Berets. This time, he studied pre-med. And Gary quickly realized he had simply traded one hostile environment for another.
College campuses at the time were not very friendly to veterans. And it wasn't long before I had a lot of people saying things to me when they would see me in the library. Because I was wearing a fatigue jacket, I didn't really have many clothes. I was sleeping in my van, wearing some of my military uniform. They'd see me, they'd try to knock my books off the table where I was studying. There was just a lot of abuse, both physical and verbal. One day it culminated where I got spit on by a bunch of the students. My homecoming was devastating to me. Here I came back and I was trying to heal, trying to make some sense out of the war, make some sense out of Deo dying for me, make some sense out of all the things that had happened to me, the things that I had done. And rather than finding an environment or people who would be willing to listen and to support, I got spit on. And it hurt. It hurt more than any of the wounds that I received in Vietnam. So I decided that I'm just going to shut down. I just said, okay, I'm not going to care about anything. But in the meantime, I knew that there was this God out there, so I thought, maybe I can find God now.
You'll remember Gary had a young cousin who prayed for him when he was a baby and almost died. Well, Gary had kept up a relationship with Jan and her husband, Buck.
I knew that they knew something that I didn't know. And so I went down to Massachusetts to meet with them and to talk with them. And they asked me if I wanted to just stay with them for a while. I said, sure, I'd love to. So as it ended up, Buck and I developed a tremendous friendship. And one day he just said, Gary, do you value our friendship? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, if you do, read this book for me, will you? So I started reading it, and I thought it was kind of odd. You know, the first chapter was Matthew, and I read through